Hey guys, this is Infinite Flash here. Today I'm going to be talking about what happened in the round one of the Sinquefield Cup here, hosted in St. Louis. We had some of the world's best players playing here, and in the first round we had Aronian playing Nakamura, Maxime Bashir Legrave playing against Magnus Carlsen in the other game, and Caruana playing Topalov in another game. So in this first game, I want to talk about it's probably the least exciting. I want to put let's say a finger, I don't know how to describe it, but it's still a pretty interesting game to look at. The game started with d4, and Aronian's always playing d4, knight f3 or c4 in the first move, hardly playing e4 ever. And this is kind of expected since he's primarily a d4 player, and Nakamura has been playing d5 lately, and he played knight f6 in kind of a King's Indian in previous matches versus Aronian. Um, Ignore that bishop g5 move, and usually they always got some sharp lines in the main lines in those kind of games. I think in Zurich they played against each other. So this time instead of that, we got a really solid opening with the main line Slav with the C6 opening, um, kind of differing from White's knight on C3. And usually in this position, Black always takes or plays E6, and we usually get called the E6 called the semi-Slav, and taking is the traditional main line, and White doesn't defend against this b5 threat. Black will be able to hold on to the pawn for a long time. So White logically plays a4, and this is the continuation of the main line that's been standing the test of time for the past about let's say 60, 70 years. And Black, brought his bishop out to prevent this e4 pawn push by White. So White continues with his development and tries to take on c4, and Black just says, "Okay, I'll let you have it." But we get this kind of this normal development with bishop c4 and White just ready to castle in this kind of position, and Black brings the bishop out here because the bishop's not really ideal on d6, and on e7 it doesn't really try to apply pressure on the center too much, and this is just it. It just seems kind of like a solid piece to have. I think a5 is an idea here to block the pawn and try to take advantage of the weak b4 square here. And this has been the main line for a long time. And White continues with castling here. Black just continues his development with knight bd7, and maybe he's planning either of these breaks in conjunction with this knight move here. Probably queen c7 in support of that too as well. Rook c8 as well. And you can see Black kind of castling and also getting rook e8 and eventually. And White continues with this move I really like in queen e2, supporting the center with a possible e4 break and getting out of the d file where he might want to get the rook on here. So it makes Black's life a little bit more difficult to play those c5 and e5 breaks, as there's a rook in the same file as the queen there. That's a little bit uncomfortable for Black. Castles, and we saw White play e4, kind of advancing the center, and Black can play bishop g4. That's pretty all right. I don't really see anything wrong with that, but he just dropped back and played something pretty solid, and you're not running into any complications after bishop g4 and h3 and g4. White might play that, so he didn't want any of that, and White dropped the bishop back here to support his center. Black was actually threatening to just capture the knight here. Pawn takes, and knight takes e4, winning a pawn, so he has to drop back and protect that. And now Black played bishop h5, kind of, let's say, avoiding h3 with tempo, but still kind of putting pressure on the center. So, here White decided to play a pretty decent move, in my opinion, e5. White can play a little bit more solid. Like he can try to maintain the center with bishop e3, but this always kind of runs into knight g4, and a move like bishop g5 doesn't look bad as well. It's all pretty good, but with the bishop here on the f3 knight always attacking it, and you could see this knight moving. Black's always getting this pressure on d4, and I don't think White really wanted to deal with that, so he immediately attacks the center with pushes and advances in the center, taking some space, and preventing a piece from accessing the f6 square since the pawn is here on a5. And in this position, black logically takes advantage of the hole here. He doesn't want to play a move such as knight e8. I mean, this just looks like white's getting a big space advantage, and after knight e8 and knight e4 comes to mind, followed by bishop g5. H4 is not a bad move either, and well, I mean, white's kind of building a very, very nice position with all these pieces kind of leaning towards the king side, and this is very, very comfortable for white. So he plays knight d5 instead, trying to, make use of the fact that there's no pawns that are going to attack this knight, and white decided since, he's under attack here, he can also play bishop d2 in this position, I suppose, but I don't think black is really afraid of that, so white kind of resolved the pawn structure in the center by forcing, by just taking the knight here and kind of leaving to the question of the bishop what he wants to do. And in this position, black played c takes d5, which is a good move in my opinion. Black doesn't really want to play a move such as e takes d5, letting white maintain this pawn in e5. And probably after, let's say, queen e3, white is prepared to reroute the knight. Sorry about this, guys. Let's say queen e3, and followed by knight d2 and a possible f4 and f5. That looks very, very uncomfortable for black. I mean, that's just one idea. Just that's probably what white was planning after that, and black didn't really want to do that. He just wanted to play a really, really solid positional kind of chess, and you can kind of see that this pawn structure resembles a French advance variation where black somehow got the bishop out of the pawn chain. On the other hand, even though black has got the bishop out of the pawn chain, black is already committed to taking on d4, and if you kind of go back to a French defense position, you can see my point here. This board is glitching very hard. You kind of made black concede that he had to take so early on d4, and generally this is considered not to be such a great thing for black to do in that kind of position. So going forward, so after c takes d5, we saw white getting out of the pin here with the bishop always attacking the knight here, and white wants to move the knight here perhaps and reroute it to d2. So we saw white play queen e3 in this position, and black logically continues with rook e8, preparing a possible knight f8, adding a defender to the king side, and the knight doesn't really have a role here immediately on the queen side where it can be blocked easily by a b3 move. And here white played bishop d2, logically getting rid of his bad bishop on, whenever you have the pawns on these kind of colors, it's kind of considered a bad bishop, and with the queen kind of, let's say, impeding in this bishop's diagonal, it kind of makes sense why you want to trade it off for black's bad, black's good bishop, and that just kind of makes sense. And in this position, I mean, black can play bishop e7, but with everything pointing towards the king side, you can always feel like white's gonna play like knight e1, followed by f4, maybe king h1 and h3 g4. This always looks a little bit uncomfortable for black to face. So he brought out one more piece and tries to aim to simplify the position into let's say a position where there are less pieces on the board, and you can try to make use of the fact that the space disadvantage that he has with the e5 pawn here, it's not too significant with less pieces on the board. That's black's logic. And now white continued with queen e1, forcing the trade of the bishops here. I mean, this is just a pretty good move in my opinion, and my board is glitching pretty hard. Please bear with me, guys. Black took on d2. There's not really many other options. You can't really defend the bishop, and you can't really insert this move first because I'm taking on b4 and gaining a tempo on the queen, and we'll take the bishop here on f3, just the next move. So black took there. White took here with the queen. I suppose the knight takes is also another option, but this is more forcing, as now black doesn't really want a queen trade, is this endgame with the bad bishop here is quite pleasant for white. I think after queen takes d2, knight takes d2, bishop g6, white has the pretty strong move bishop b5, attacking this knight, and if what black plays like a move like bishop rook d8, we can already see bishop takes d7, rook takes d7, and rook c1. White is first to the c file, and has this plan of knight b3, knight c5 at some point, and is a very very comfortable edge in a positional form in this kind of endgame. And this bishop's kind of, even though it's a nice piece pointing across the diagonal, it's pointing into thin air, in my opinion. So white should be a little bit better in that position. It's not something that Nakamura didn't really want to, defend and bear with for 70 moves. So instead of taking the queen, he just decided to drop the queen back here on d8. I mean, queen b6 also looked okay, but for the moment, that's a glitch, guys. I'm sorry about that. He just wanted to bring his queen back and felt more comfortable with that position. White continued with knight g5, and one idea is that the bishop was attacking this knight, and the knight probably is more aggressive here on g5, kind of forcing the move out of black here to resolve the tension on the king side over here. And white's idea is that at some point, if black plays h6 or somehow kicks the knight, he can always go to h3 and go to f4 at some point, and this is not such a bad square either. And he's allowing the f pawn to be moved at some point as well. So black played bishop g6, and white decided to capture it. And his idea is that perhaps after h takes g4, white's going to play queen f4 and try to put some pressure on the king side. And obviously this is unpleasant for black, so he decided after bishop takes g6 to take with the f pawn, gaining a very very solid structure. And the same thing is not so easy to crack. I think moves such as queen e7, defending the e7 square properly, and let's say queen f4, f takes g4, queen e4, queen e7, queen h4. There's always h6 to kick out this knight, and well, this is not a problem for black. So let's see what happens. Just give me a second, guys. Bishop takes. See if I can find this. Give me a second. We had white playing instead of playing queen f4, he just decided to play f4 in this position, kind of gaining space on the king side. I'm trying to get my PG and organized, guys. This board is very very glitchy at the moment. Hopefully you guys can bear with me. So white played f4, and black logically continues, putting a rook on the open file. He doesn't really have a clear plan just yet, but he's got to activate his forces, so why not put a rook on the open file, And white puts his own rook on the open file, and suggests that if rook takes c1, I always have this rook to recapture, and I have a very very nice control over this file. And black doesn't really want to allow rook takes c8 with the capture of the queen, when this rook might come here and white would have control of the open file, and that's a significant factor. So he brought his queen out instead, and now he's connected his rooks, so it looks like a fair position. And also after rook takes c8, rook takes c8, the e6 pawn is defended because of this lateral defense by the queen. That's also one reason why he played queen b6. And now white gained space with a5, kind of forcing the queen to move right now, and it's kind of a space gaining move. And one move that black might play here that you would consider is queen b3, trying to infiltrate into white's position. But after rook f3, it's kind of sad to say that this queen doesn't really have a great spot to move to. If black goes here, I think that a move such as rook c3 or probably, I think rook c3, right? Rook c3. I mean, even if white does nothing, I mean, this position with the open file looks quite nice. Also that rook takes c8. I just noticed the tactic. Rook takes c8 and knight takes c6 is threatened. So obviously white black can't allow that, and this is not acceptable. And inserting rook takes c1, queen takes c1, and queen a4 isn't that great because white can play queen c3 and he has control over the open file. I want to just point this out. Takes queen a4, queen c3, and there's everything's defended over here and by the queen, which is just a nice piece, and white controls all the squares in this kind of position and has a great knight, a rook then that will come back to support the open file here, and white is clearly better in this kind of position. So black logically played queen a6, kind of controlling this square, and let's see if I can find black logically plays queen a6. I'm sorry about that, guys. I'm just having so many glitches with this analysis board at the moment. It's just not working properly. And after queen a6, white brought the queen over here to somewhat influence these dark squares over here, possibly get a little bit more control over the b6 square. Black can play b6, but as we see, things aren't so simple. The first move that you might think of is rook c4 in this position, but I think that after rook takes c4, eventually there's going to be ending up a pawn here on c4, regardless of which way black takes, and after rook c1, white will be collecting this pawn on c4, and black cannot defend the pawn in c4 because the e6 pawn is hanging in that line. And the same thing goes for the queen taking here. I think that this is very, very nice coordinating on the pawn there. And again, rook c8 cannot be met by that way. So if we go back, well, that's too far. Let's see. So rook c8, Nakamura just played h6 first. And, in a way, as we saw in that line with rook c4, the d pawn would have taken there, and the knight could have jumped on e4 in addition. Not just white getting on the pawn right there. White could have also moved the knight over here. So black keeps his options flexible by kicking the knight away first and kind of forcing white's move with knight f3, the kind of a natural move supporting the center. This looks very, very pretty to me. Kind of feels right. And now black, breaks up, tries to get rid of the space-taking pawn with the move b6, trying to counterattack this. And white plays this little bit of a nice move first, forcing the knight to move here with queen d6 and trying to irritate black a little bit. And black plays the solid move knight f8, and this covers kind of all the weak squares in black's position, all the tender and important squares. Those the e6 square and the g6 square especially. And I think white had the slight advantage here all game, kind of with the space and kind of the small positional edge in general, but somehow he loses it, and it kind of fizzles out, and Aronian couldn't find anything better than queen b4, and I mean after queen d3, black starts to infiltrate, and we can see that after this, I mean Aronian just couldn't find anything better than queen d2. A move such as queen takes b6 actually just loses the game after rook takes c1, rook takes c1, and queen e3, forking the king and the rook, and black will win in this kind of position. So we saw that white was forced to play queen d2, and obviously this is not ideal. And Nakamura really wanted to try to keep some pieces on the board, so he decided to play queen b3 and possibly trade off one rook and allow the other rook to try to infiltrate, or perhaps the same thing right now. And I think at this point, Aronian was thinking about, he still has some kind of edge, symbolic edge with the space advantage, but clearly black's activity is kind of annoying. So now he's thinking about rook e1, trying to coordinate the rook on the e3 square, and also kind of guarding it against the queen e3 check that I mentioned. Rook takes c1, black kind of trades one piece before kind of this infiltration idea that I mentioned already. Rook takes c1, kind of controlling the file as we've seen, and rook a8, We can see that's coming. And in this kind of position, it's pretty difficult to recommend anything for white. He just continued with h4, kind of putting one more pawn and getting a little bit more control over the square, possibly allowing h5 in the future. In a very long distant kind of endgame, this kind of move can be very, very helpful. And he's kind of asking black what he wants to do, so black immediately decides to bring his rook down and pressure the pawn, and rook c2 was played to defend the pawn, and black gave the check, and we obviously can see that this kind of position is almost flickering out of bite, given the solid nature of the pawn structure and white's inability to gain activity because of the weak b pawn. And in this position, white continued with kind of a slight waiting move with the king g3, and black played the kind of waiting game here. And if white wanted a little bit of anything, maybe he should play queen c3, allowing the queen trade with queen takes c3. And after this, this kind of pawn structure is very, very solid for black, actually, and rook d1 kind of maintaining this kind of activity. And it's maybe white has a slight advantage, but black should be able to hold this. And white should probably give up the weak c3 pawn for the b5 pawn in a line such as this one, where this comes with check, and even though white has the advantage of the pawn structure, black remains very, very solid in this position and should hold the draw rather easily, actually. And maybe that was white's best chance for a little bit of something, but after rook c8, black just took the pawn in b2, and queen c1, and white's actually down a pawn now, and he has to kind of force the measures here, and there's a knight hanging here, so black logically first threatens actually the pawn in g2 with a mate threat, or quite a dangerous threat, and white found a pretty interesting way to kind of meet this with queen h1, also bringing the queen possibly to attack this pawn at some point and putting pressure on the king side with queen h3 and h5, trying to break through this structure. And after this, I think black just played queen a3 to defend the knight, and we kind of saw this repetition of moves where white didn't really see anything better than to just retreat, and black didn't really see anything better than just to retreat. And we saw a pretty well played draw on here. It's not really clear to me where Aronian went wrong. He played a pretty good game, and Nakamura just defended pretty solidly, and it's not really clear to me where Aronian could have improved. Well, anyways, guys, that was a pretty interesting positional struggle that we saw there. Not much happening within the pawns. Mostly piece activity was part of the main part of this game, and a draw agreed, a fair one. Hope you enjoyed. This is Infinite Flash signing out. I'll do other games now.